Every town has that one place, the one kids whisper about at sleepovers, the one teenagers dare each other to explore when the night gets too heavy with boredom. In our town, that place was Ridgeway Asylum. Perched at the edge of a tangled forest, it stood like a rotting monument to everything people wanted to forget about the past. Long before I was born, it had been an institution where the insane were locked away, experimented on, and left to rot. My grandfather used to mutter about it whenever the subject came up, always with a dark look in his eyes. He had worked construction nearby in the 1960s and swore he'd seen patients pressed against the barred windows, their faces pale, their mouths moving in silent screams. The asylum closed after a series of tragedies: staff who went missing, patients found dead under mysterious circumstances, whispers of occult practices hidden under the guise of treatments. Officially, the state shut it down due to unsanitary conditions and budgetary issues. But everyone in town knew that was a lie. The truth was, Ridgeway had become something else. A place where the line between the living and the dead had been permanently torn open. When I was 17, Marcus, Leah, Tyler, and I found ourselves standing before its massive front doors on a chilly October night, shivering not just from the cold, but from the weight of what we were about to do. It had started as a dare, as these things always do. Marcus bragged he could last a night inside without flinching. Leah, desperate to prove she wasn't the fragile girl people assumed, agreed to come along. Tyler, always the clown, said he wanted to film it for proof. And me? I went because I wanted to know. I'd always been drawn to the stories, the unanswered questions, the shadows that hovered around Ridgeway like a storm cloud. I wanted to feel that fear for myself, to see if there was really anything on the other side of all those legends. So there we were, standing on the cracked stone path, our bikes abandoned behind us, the asylum's silhouette towering above like the carcass of some great beast. The moon hung behind it, pale and cold, casting long skeletal shadows across the yard. Every window was shattered like empty eye sockets staring down at us. Ivy strangled the walls, and graffiti glowed faintly in the beam of Tyler's flashlight. The air was wrong there. You don't notice air until it shifts, until it presses against you thick and heavy, colder than it should be. That's how it felt as soon as we stepped into the courtyard. We hadn't even gone inside yet, but it was like something had already noticed us. Leah whispered that we shouldn't do this, that it wasn't too late to back out. Marcus just smirked, called her a coward, and put his hand against the massive double doors. They were wood, warped with age, but still intact. He shoved hard, and with a groaning creak that echoed like a scream, they opened inward. A wave of air spilled out, stale, damp, sour with rot. It smelled like old hospitals, like rust and mildew and something far worse underneath, a copper tang that made my stomach turn. Tyler coughed, covering his nose, but he was grinning too. He pulled out his phone, shining its light as he filmed. "Say hello to YouTube, guys," he joked, though his voice cracked on the word hello. None of us laughed. We were already too deep into it. Inside, the asylum waited. The lobby stretched before us, its once grand design now crumbling into ruin. A chandelier hung broken from the ceiling, chains twisted, crystals shattered across the floor. The tile was cracked and uneven, weeds sprouting through the gaps. Rusted gurneys were overturned in the corners, their wheels long frozen in place. Wheelchairs sat like abandoned skeletons, missing arms and seats, their frames gnawed by time. The walls had been painted over with graffiti, skulls, pentagrams, obscene jokes, but beneath it all you could still see the fading stencils, admissions, records, Ward A. Every sound we made echoed too loud, bouncing back at us, reminding us of how small we were in that cavernous space. Leah's shoes squeaked against the tile, and she winced as though the sound might summon something out of the shadows. We huddled together, our flashlights swinging wildly across doorways that led to endless hallways. Each one looked the same, dark, hollow, waiting. I remember the silence most of all. Not just quiet, but a silence so deep it seemed to swallow everything else. Even our whispers died quickly, absorbed by walls that felt like they had been listening for decades. I swear, standing there, I felt a pulse beneath my feet, like the building itself had a heartbeat. Tyler laughed nervously, saying the place felt alive, but the moment the words left his mouth, something clattered in the darkness down one of the halls. We froze, staring. Marcus hissed that it was probably just a rat, but I wasn't so sure. The sound hadn't been skittering, it had been deliberate, like a shoe scraping against stone. Something in there had moved, waiting for us to follow. Marcus insisted on leading the way, his flashlight cutting jagged beams into the darkness ahead. The beam illuminated dust, swirling like ash, floating slowly through the cold air. Each step echoed too loudly, ricocheting off the walls like gunshots, and every sound seemed to double back on us, tricking our ears. Tyler kept filming, his phone clutched tight in both hands, whispering commentary as if we were on some haunted house live stream. He tried to sound brave, but his voice wavered, and sweat glistened on his forehead, even though the air inside the asylum was freezing. Leah clung to my arm, her breathing shallow, eyes darting from doorway to doorway. I could feel her nails digging into my sleeve every time our light caught the outline of something. A broken bed frame, a rusted cabinet, peeling paint that looked disturbingly like claw marks. The building was not just abandoned, it was devoured, consumed by time and by something else that lingered long after the last patient had left. We turned down one of the main hallways, the plaster ceiling sagging in spots, wires dangling like vines. Water dripped steadily from somewhere unseen, plinking into a rusted bucket left behind decades ago. The hallway split into two wings, each marked by faded lettering painted directly onto the wall. The left wing read, Ward A, Long-Term Patients. The right read, Ward B, Isolation. A shiver crawled down my spine when I read the second one. Isolation? The word didn't just mean loneliness here. It meant punishment, silence, the place where screams went unheard. Marcus, of course, grinned like he'd been presented with a challenge. "Let's check isolation," he said, striding to the right without hesitation. Leah muttered a curse under her breath but followed, unwilling to be left alone. I hesitated for a moment, staring down the left wing. For just a second I thought I saw movement there, something pale slipping back into the shadows. But when I blinked, the hallway was empty again. We pushed deeper, the walls closing in on us as if the building itself wanted us trapped. Our flashlights flickered every few steps, beams cutting in and out, leaving us blind for terrifying fractions of a second. The smell grew stronger too. Mildew, rot, and something metallic. The smell of blood that shouldn't have still lingered after all these years. Tyler whispered that maybe squatters lived here, or addicts. And that thought chilled me even more. Ghosts were one thing. Flesh and blood people hiding in the dark, waiting for intruders? That felt worse. Leah begged Marcus to turn back, but he only laughed, saying, "This is the good part." Then he shoved open the first heavy door we came to, its hinges screaming like a wounded animal. The room inside was an isolation cell, bare concrete walls, stained with water damage, and something darker. Chains hung from the far wall, bolted into the concrete, rust eating away at the links, but not enough to hide what they were. Restraints. Tyler's camera light swept across the floor, revealing deep scratches gouged into the stone, long marks like fingernails dragging desperately against it. Leah gasped and backed into me, shaking. Marcus muttered Jesus under his breath, but he was grinning again, a thin, shaky grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. We stepped inside, the air thicker somehow, heavy with despair. I could almost hear whispers in that room. Not words, not even voices exactly, just the soft echo of agony that never left. I thought it was my imagination until Leah grabbed my arm and whispered, "Do you hear that?" Her eyes were wide, terrified, and that's when I knew it wasn't just me. We left the cell quickly, closing the door behind us, but the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to follow us down the hallway, faint at first but then stronger, overlapping murmurs that made no sense, but carried unmistakable desperation. My pulse thundered in my ears as we passed more doors, each one identical, each one with its own faint stains, its own stories etched into the walls. Then Tyler froze, his light fixed on the end of the hallway. "Did you see that?" We all turned. At the far end of the corridor, something moved. Just a shadow, just a flicker, but it wasn't ours. It slid across the wall, stretched unnaturally long, and vanished into the corner where the hall turned deeper into darkness. Leah whimpered, tugging my sleeve. Marcus said it was nothing, just our minds playing tricks on us, but Tyler's camera caught it. I saw the way his screen glowed, showing something we hadn't imagined. A shape, tall and thin, standing where the shadow had been. We should have left right then. Every instinct screamed it. The asylum wasn't abandoned, not really. It had been waiting, and now it knew we were here. But Marcus, stubborn and arrogant, whispered, "Come on, let's see what it is." He walked faster, his boots slamming against the concrete. Leah pleaded with him, tears brimming in her eyes. I stayed close behind her, torn between dragging her out and following Marcus to keep him from doing something reckless. Tyler trailed, filming, shakily, muttering prayers under his breath now. As we approached the corner, the air grew colder, each breath visible in the beam of our lights. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. Then we heard it. A scrape. A dragging noise, slow and deliberate, as if something was being pulled across the floor just out of sight. Marcus raised his light, stepping around the corner first. The hallway beyond was empty, or at least it should have been. But smeared across the floor, glistening faintly in our beams, was a fresh trail. Wet, dark, leading away into the gloom. It wasn't water. The metallic scent was unmistakable. Leah screamed, muffling it with her own hand, shaking her head violently. Tyler dropped his camera for a second, his knees buckling. Marcus stood frozen. The bravado drained from his face, his hand trembling as the flashlight shook. I didn't say a word. None of us did. Because, deep down, we all knew the same truth. We weren't alone in Ridgeway Asylum, and whatever was here had just invited us deeper in.
The trail of darkness stretched ahead of us like a warning, but Marcus couldn't resist following it. He muttered something about it being just paint or old stains, though even he didn't sound convinced. His light quivered with each step, the beam darting erratically across the cracked tiles. Leah clutched my arm so tightly I thought her nails would draw blood through my jacket, begging me to make him stop. Tyler stayed at the back, filming still, though the phone trembled violently in his hands. The trail smeared along the hallway, curving left into a larger chamber, and though every part of me screamed to leave, I knew Marcus wouldn't stop until he saw what made it. We stepped into what must once have been the cafeteria. The room was cavernous, ceiling beams exposed, most of the tables overturned and rotting. The smell was overpowering here, damp rot and iron so sharp it coated the back of my throat. Our lights swept across the room, and I froze. On the far wall, words had been scrawled in something dark and sticky. Not paint, not ink. One word written over and over again in jagged streaks. Stay. Leah gasped and her knees buckled. I caught her before she fell, my own body trembling. Tyler swore under his breath, his cocky grin gone completely. Tyler whispered, "Oh God," over and over, his voice climbing in panic. The sound of dragging returned, not from behind us this time, but from the shadows at the far corner of the room. Slow, deliberate, like nails across stone. My stomach turned cold, and I felt sweat bead on my forehead. Marcus raised his light and took a step forward, and that's when we saw it. For a moment, it looked like just another shadow, too tall and thin to belong to a person. But as the light cut across it, the shape moved, not away, but toward us. It slid forward unnaturally, its limbs too long, its head bent at an impossible angle. The figure stepped into the weak glow of Marcus's flashlight, and all four of us froze. It was a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her hospital gown clung to her emaciated frame, torn and stained dark in patches that could only be blood. Her skin was ashen, stretched tight over her bones, and her hair hung in tangled clumps across her face. But it was her eyes that rooted me in place. Wide, white, and empty, reflecting the light in a way that made them glow. She didn't walk, she dragged 1 foot behind her, the scrape we had been hearing. With each movement, her jaw unhinged slightly, mouth opening wider than it should as though preparing to scream. Leah let out a strangled cry, muffling it with her hand, tears streaming down her face. Tyler's phone slipped from his grip, clattering to the floor, its screen still glowing as it captured everything. Marcus, shaking, tried to convince himself it wasn't real. "It's someone's messing with us, a squatter." His voice cracked in the middle of the word. The woman's head snapped toward him at the sound, her glowing eyes locking onto him like a predator finding its prey. Then she moved. It wasn't fast, not at first. She lurched forward, her limbs jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. But as she neared the center of the room, her movements grew sharper, quicker, her body contorting in unnatural ways. Her jaw opened wider, and the scream finally came. It wasn't human. Piercing, hollow wail that filled every inch of the cafeteria, vibrating in my bones, making my teeth ache. Leah collapsed to the ground, clutching her ears. Tyler scrambled backward, his hands clawing at the tiles. Marcus stumbled, his bravado broken, his light shaking violently as he pointed it at her. I grabbed Leah, dragging her toward the hallway, shouting for Tyler to move. But Marcus stayed frozen, staring at the woman as if hypnotized. She lunged, closing the distance in a single horrific jerk of her body, and her claw-like hands stretched toward his throat. At the last second, Marcus snapped out of it and bolted, nearly slamming into me and Leah as we staggered into the hallway. Tyler scooped up his phone, still recording, and we all sprinted blindly down the corridor, our lights bouncing wildly across the cracked walls. The scream followed us, echoing, growing louder, as though the asylum itself was carrying it down every hallway. We didn't stop running until we crashed through a set of double doors at the far end of the wing. The door slammed shut behind us with a thunderous bang, cutting off the scream abruptly. We stood there, gasping for air, clutching one another in silence. The room we'd stumbled into looked like some kind of recreation hall, with broken furniture and dust-covered remnants of board games scattered across the floor, but none of us cared what it was. The only thing that mattered was that the woman hadn't followed us through. Not yet. Leah sobbed uncontrollably, whispering that she wanted to leave, that we never should have come. Tyler leaned against the wall, his phone still running, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Marcus tried to say something, maybe an apology, maybe another excuse, but his voice shook too badly to form words. I just stood there, my heart hammering, knowing in that moment that we had crossed a line. The asylum wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and whatever walked its halls had now seen us, smelled us, chosen us. In the silence that followed, I realized something even worse. The scream had stopped, yes, but the whispers were back, louder than before, all around us, voices overlapping, chanting in tones I couldn't understand. They weren't distant anymore. They were in the room with us.
The whispers didn't fade. They multiplied, circling us, pressing closer until it felt like the air itself was vibrating with them. Leah pressed her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth, but the voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside our heads, rattling around like wasps. Tyler's phone flickered, the screen glitching into static before snapping back, as though it too were caught in whatever energy filled the room. Marcus swore under his breath and tried the double doors we'd slammed through, but they wouldn't budge. He threw his weight against them once, twice, 3 times, and each time they groaned but refused to open. It was as though something heavy pressed against the other side, holding us in. The whispers rose into a chant then, rhythmic and pulsing, and I realized with dawning horror that the words were in English now. Over and over in 100 overlapping voices, they hissed the same word: stay. The air grew heavier, thick and damp, making it harder to breathe. Our lights flickered violently, beams stretching and distorting shadows across the room. I could see them moving when they shouldn't, bending toward us like living things. Leah clung to me, whispering prayers under her breath, her tears soaking into my sleeve. Tyler's camera, still recording, picked up faint faces in the dark when I glanced at the screen. Distorted, half-formed, but there. Dozens of them peering out from the walls and corners of the recreation hall. I told him to turn it off, but he shook his head violently, insisting we had to have proof, that no one would believe us otherwise. His stubbornness made me want to slap him, but I didn't have the strength. A loud metallic bang ripped through the hall, echoing off the walls like a gunshot. Marcus spun around, his light catching a row of overturned chairs. One of them had just moved, on its own. As we watched, another chair slid slowly across the floor, scraping against the tiles with a sound that made my teeth ache. Then another. Soon the entire row was dragging itself into a jagged semicircle facing us, like an audience preparing to watch a show. Leah screamed and buried her face into my chest. Marcus lost it, grabbing a broken table leg from the floor and swinging it wildly at the air. "Leave us alone!" he shouted, his voice cracking. But the shadows only pressed closer, and the whispers grew louder, their mocking chant bouncing from wall to wall. Stay, stay, stay. Then came the footsteps, not dragging this time, but pounding, heavy, deliberate, coming from the hallway we'd just escaped. Each thud shook the doors behind us, rattling them in their frames. Something massive was walking toward us, its weight bending the air. We froze, all 4 of us staring as the doors began to bulge inward, bending like they were made of soft clay. My stomach turned to ice. The thing that woman was only a glimpse of. It was still coming. Desperate, Marcus ran to the far wall and found another set of doors, smaller, likely leading to one of the connecting corridors. He yanked at the handle, and to our relief, it gave way, swinging open with a shriek of rusted hinges. Without thinking, we all bolted through, our footsteps thundering down a narrow hallway, lined with peeling paint and broken picture frames. The chanting followed, muffled now, but still echoing in our skulls. The pounding steps, however, did not. They remained behind, as though the creature was letting us go, hurting us deeper instead of finishing us. The hallway twisted and turned, always leading us further into the asylum's heart. Tyler whispered that we should mark our path, but when he turned to do it, his breath caught. The walls behind us were sealing, the paint bubbled and cracked, and in its place came more brick, fresh mortar filling in the space until the corridor behind us was gone, replaced by solid wall. We were being swallowed alive. Leah collapsed again, sobbing hysterically, and I had to drag her along, promising I didn't believe, that we'd find another way out, that we'd be okay. Finally, we burst into another large chamber. This one looked like a treatment ward, rows of rusted hospital beds, restraints dangling from the frames like skeletal hands. The stench here was unbearable, rot and old chemicals mingling into a choking miasma. Tyler swept his light across the beds and froze, his voice barely a whisper. They're occupied. I followed his beam and my heart nearly stopped. The beds weren't empty. Shapes lay on them, covered in brittle, stained sheets. Some were skeletal, others disturbingly intact, their faces gaunt and twisted as though frozen mid-scream. And then, as though on cue, the shapes began to move, slowly. The sheets shifted, skeletal fingers clawing their way into the open. One by one, the patients began to rise. Leah shrieked and fell backward. Marcus swore violently, and Tyler filmed through tears, his camera trembling as he whispered, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" I wanted to run, but the door behind us had already slammed shut. The only way out was forward, past the rising corpses. They moved slowly and painfully, but their empty eyes followed us, and their mouths opened in silent screams. Their jaws unhinged wider and wider until the silence broke into one unified shriek that split my skull. We bolted between the beds, shoving aside skeletal arms and stumbling over fallen frames. Leah tripped, and for a moment I thought we'd lose her, but Marcus yanked her up with inhuman strength, pulling her forward as the corpses clawed at his jacket. He screamed, a raw, terrified sound, as their nails ripped into his skin, leaving bloody scratches across his arms. Tyler's camera caught it all, the lens cracking as one of the dead slammed a hand at it, but somehow he never let go. At the far end of the ward, another door stood slightly ajar, light flickering from within. We barreled toward it, corpses wailing behind us, their brittle bones cracking as they dragged themselves from their beds in pursuit. We shoved the door open, nearly falling inside, and slammed it behind us. Silence fell instantly. The screams, the pounding footsteps, the whispers, all gone. But as we caught our breath, leaning against the door, I realized the truth. The asylum wasn't trying to kill us quickly. It was playing with us, dragging us deeper into its maze, feeding off our fear. And somewhere inside, something far worse than corpses or ghosts was waiting.
The room we had stumbled into was smaller than the ward, but somehow colder. Our breath fogged in the air, drifting upward toward a ceiling we couldn't see. The flickering light came from a single bulb swinging on a frayed wire, casting sickly yellow circles across the cracked floor. For a moment, we thought we had found refuge. Leah collapsed in the corner, rocking and mumbling to herself, while Marcus tore strips from his shirt to bind the scratches on his arms. Tyler sat hunched over, replaying the footage on his camera in disbelief, as though watching it again might make it less real. I stood frozen, the enormity of it all crushing down on me. We should never have come here. That thought replayed in my head over and over, louder than the silence. But the asylum wasn't finished. The bulb began to swing harder, though there was no wind. The shadows it cast stretched unnaturally across the walls, merging together until they formed human-like shapes. One leaned long and thin, its head cocked at a sickening angle. Another crouched low, spider-like, arms far too long. And then, as we watched, they peeled themselves off the wall. Their bodies remained two-dimensional, flat and lightless, but they moved like predators, circling us without sound. Leah's voice rose into a shriek, and she pressed her face into her knees. Marcus gripped his makeshift weapon tighter, though it shook in his hand. Tyler whispered, "It's still recording," as though that fact mattered when hell itself was spilling into the room. The shadows darted closer, faster than the eye could follow, flickering from wall to wall, sometimes rushing so near we could feel the air shift around us. Each time they stopped short, mocking us, drawing out our terror. Then one of them broke the game. It lashed forward, flat black arms snaring Leah by the wrists, dragging her across the floor. She screamed and fought, her nails ripping across the tiles, leaving bloody streaks. Marcus lunged forward, swinging his broken table leg through the shadow's form. To our astonishment, it connected. The shape screeched, the sound like tearing metal, and dissolved back into the wall. Leah scrambled free, shaking uncontrollably, clutching my arm so hard I thought she'd break it. But the victory was short-lived. The other shadows surged at once, an onslaught of black forms rushing us in silence. Marcus swung wildly, striking one, then another, but there were too many. They swarmed the room, darting across the walls, climbing onto the ceiling, their eyeless faces leering down. Tyler dropped his camera in panic, the lens cracking further as it hit the ground, but the red recording light stayed on. He and I dragged Leah toward the far side of the room where we prayed another exit existed. My hand brushed against a cold metal handle. A door. Without hesitation, I yanked it open and shoved Leah and Tyler through. Marcus followed, slamming it behind us, just as the shadows lunged. We stumbled into a stairwell, The concrete steps spiraled downward into blackness, the railing rusted and sticky to the touch. A sign above the entrance, faded but legible, read, "Basement treatment levels." My stomach dropped. Every horror story, every whispered legend about asylums always ended in the basement. Yet we had no choice. The door behind us rattled violently, shadows seeping through the cracks like smoke, and we fled downward, our footsteps echoing into the void. The deeper we went, the colder it became. Not just chill, but a wet, bone-deep cold that gnawed at our flesh. The air grew thicker too, heavy with the smell of mildew and iron. By the time we reached the bottom, Leah's lips were blue, her teeth chattering so loudly they echoed. The corridor here was narrower, lined with rusted pipes that dripped water on the floor in steady, mocking rhythms. Our lights barely reached the walls, swallowed by the darkness pressing in. Then we heard it, the crying, faint at first, like a child whimpering in the distance. Leah froze, her eyes wide. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "That's not real. That's not real." But it grew louder, echoing down the hall until it was all we could hear, a pitiful wail that tugged at something primal in us. Against every shred of reason, we moved toward it. We couldn't stop ourselves. Each step drew us closer, like the sound itself was pulling us forward by invisible threads. The hallway opened into a cavernous chamber lined with rusted gurneys and broken machinery. In the center sat a small wooden chair, too clean, too new compared to everything else. And on it, a child, a boy no older than 8, dressed in tattered hospital clothes, his face streaked with tears. He looked up at us, eyes wide and shining, and sobbed, "Help me." Leah rushed forward before we could stop her, dropping to her knees beside him. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing his hair back. But the boy's eyes shifted from wet and innocent to blank white. His mouth stretched impossibly wide, splitting his cheeks, and from within came a guttural shriek. The sound blasted through the chamber, rattling the pipes, shattering the last of our sanity. Leah screamed as the boy dissolved into black smoke, curling upward before vanishing into the ceiling. In his place, the chair sat empty, but the restraints attached to its arms snapped free and lashed out. They coiled around Leah's wrists and ankles, dragging her onto the seat, pinning her there as she kicked and thrashed. Marcus and I lunged forward, clawing at the straps, but they tightened with inhuman strength, cutting into her flesh until blood ran down her arms. Her screams became ragged, then choked, as the chair itself began to sink into the floor, slowly, deliberately, as though the asylum were swallowing her whole. Tyler fumbled for his camera, tears streaming down his face, and screamed that we had to document it, that someone had to know. I wanted to kill him. Leah was being dragged into hell, and he thought about footage. Marcus and I pulled with all our strength, but the chair sank faster, the floor liquefying into black tar. Leah's eyes met mine in that final moment, wide with terror, and then she was gone, swallowed by the asylum, her screams cut off in an instant. The floor hardened again, leaving only the empty chair, still rocking slightly.
We collapsed, broken, sobbing. Marcus pounded his fists into the ground, screaming Leah's name, while Tyler vomited in the corner. I sat motionless, numb, my mind a hollow void. She was gone, and I knew, deep down, that we would be next.
We sat in silence, staring at the empty chair, as if by sheer willpower we could bring Leah back. But the asylum had claimed her, just as it had claimed the countless others who had passed through these halls. The pipes above us groaned, releasing bursts of steam that hissed like mocking laughter. Tyler clutched his camera to his chest, whispering through sobs, "We have to get out. We have to tell people." Marcus didn't answer. His eyes were glazed, his body trembling, his spirit breaking in front of me. I knew if we didn't leave now, he wouldn't leave at all. We stumbled down the corridor, every step echoing like gunshots. The darkness seemed thicker now, pressing against us from all sides. The crying had stopped, but in its place came whispers. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, speaking all at once, low and urgent, overlapping into an unintelligible roar. The walls themselves pulsed faintly, wet and alive, as if we were inside a giant throat. I tried not to think about it, but each whisper seemed aimed at me, urging me to turn back, to surrender, to let the asylum have me. My grip on reality slipped further with every step. We stumbled down the corridor, every step echoing like gunshots. The darkness seemed thicker now, pressing against us from all sides. The crying had stopped, but in its place came whispers. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, speaking all at once, low and urgent, overlapping into an unintelligible roar. The walls themselves pulsed faintly, wet and alive, as if we were inside a giant throat. I tried not to think about it, but each whisper seemed aimed at me, urging me to turn back, to surrender, to let the asylum have me. My grip on reality slipped further with every step. At last, we reached a massive steel door at the end of the hall. A faint draft seeped through its cracks, carrying the scent of fresh air. Freedom. Marcus lunged at it, pounding his fists against the rusted surface, screaming for it to open. Tyler tried the handle, but it was fused shut with age. Desperation clawed at me. We were so close, yet trapped. Then the whispers ceased. The silence was worse than the noise. The ground shuddered. Dust fell from the ceiling. From behind us, deep in the bowels of the asylum, came the sound of chains dragging across stone. Slow, deliberate, growing louder. Tyler raised his camera with shaking hands, pointing it toward the darkness. The lens caught something huge. At first it was just a shape, shifting and writhing like a mass of shadows. Then it took form. A towering figure, stitched together from dozens of bodies, limbs protruding at odd angles, heads fused into its chest, their mouths still moving in silent screams. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin points of cold fire, fixed on us. Marcus froze, paralyzed by terror. Tyler whispered, "God, it's him, the warden." That name, spoken in dread, sent a chill deeper than the air ever could. The creature dragged its chains closer, each link sparking as it scraped the ground. It moved with dreadful slowness, as though it had all the time in the world, confident we could not escape. And maybe it was right. Tyler backed away, the camera still recording, until his back hit the steel door. "We can't fight that," he whispered. "We can't." His words cut off as one of the creature's chains lashed forward, impaling him through the chest. Blood sprayed across the door, and he screamed once before the chain yanked him into the air. The warden dragged him closer, pulling him into its writhing mass of bodies. Tyler's face vanished into the horror, his voice joining the chorus of whispers. His camera clattered to the floor, the red light still blinking. Marcus snapped. With a howl of pure rage, he charged the creature, swinging his broken table leg. Futile. The warden caught him effortlessly, lifting him by the throat. Marcus thrashed, spitting curses, until the creature snapped his neck like a twig and added his body to the writhing collection that made up its chest. I screamed his name, my voice tearing through the chamber, but it was useless. They were gone. All of them. I was alone. The warden turned its burning eyes on me,
and I felt every ounce of strength leave my body. My legs refused to move, my chest heaved, but no air filled my lungs. It raised its chains, and I knew this was the end. But then, something strange happened. The camera on the floor flickered, its cracked lens glowing faintly. The asylum seemed to hesitate, the warden pausing mid-strike. The whispers returned, louder than ever. Angry this time. The walls shook, dust rained down, the ground split beneath my feet. Instinct took over. I grabbed the camera and ran, not back toward the creature, but toward the steel door. I slammed the camera into the rusted handle again and again until the metal groaned and bent. With a final desperate shove, the door burst open. Cold night air hit my face like salvation. I stumbled outside, collapsing onto the overgrown grass, the asylum looming behind me like a nightmare made flesh. But the whispers didn't stop. They poured out of the doorway with me, clinging to my skin, burrowing into my mind. I scrambled to my feet and ran, crashing through the weeds, branches tearing at my arms, until the asylum disappeared into the trees. Only then did I collapse, gasping, sobbing, the camera still clutched in my hands. It was over, or so I thought. Days later, when I finally had the courage to watch the footage, my blood ran cold. The video showed everything: the shadows, the boy, Leah's disappearance, Tyler's death, Marcus's defiance. But there was more. In every frame, even from the very beginning, there was the warden, lurking in the background, watching us. He had always been there, always waiting. And now, as I write this, I feel him near. The camera sits across the room, its red light still blinking, though I removed the batteries days ago. At night, I hear chains dragging outside my door. I don't know how much longer I have. The asylum doesn't let survivors go. It only gives them time to spread its story, to lure others in. If you're reading this, don't go near Hollow Creek. Don't look for the asylum. Don't even try to prove me wrong. Because once it notices you, once the warden fixes his eyes on you, there's no escape.